So I'm going to read this morning. We're not going to have it on the screens initially. I just want you to hear it. Then we're going to come back to it in a few moments. Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. So just listen. If you have an actual Bible, then follow along. Now the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Then verse 22, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. The prophet he's referring to here is Isaiah. Now, these are the words of Isaiah. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. And when Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. The common expression that you will hear around the holiday season, Christmas season, is the phrase, peace on earth. Peace on earth. It's a phrase that's been common to hear from the angels that spoke to the shepherds on that first Christmas night, all the way to Linus explaining to Charlie Brown the true meaning of Christmas is peace on earth. Now, I don't know about you, but peace on earth is not always a descriptive phrase of what happens during the Christmas season in our lives. As a matter of fact, Christmas can be one of the least peaceful times of the year if we're not careful. It's anything but a time of peace. I mean, let's be honest with each other. Family peace? Not so much. Have any of you ever had the discussion with your spouse how much time you're going to spend at each other's relatives' homes? Is that a conversation that ever happens in your house? Let me tell you the best way to resolve that. Move to the opposite side of the country from your in-laws. I'm just kidding. They're not going to watch this or see this. They might. It's like octagon time, and you have to have that conversation with your spouse, right? Or here's more of a common conversation with Ashley and I. You spent what on who? Do I even know that person? Right? Is it that type of conversations at your house? And then family peace on Christmas morning. Have you ever had that moment where after the presents were distributed, that your children either did not get what they wanted or were not satisfied with what they got? Now, if you're a parent like me, these words have come out of your mouth at some point in Christmas past. Well, I can take it back if you don't want it. How would you like to not have a Christmas with presents? Here's my favorite guilt trip. You know there's kids all over this world right now that will not get a single thing for Christmas. Anybody ever had these conversations as a parent, right? So Christmas doesn't always represent a time of family peace. What about financial peace? Man, running up the credit card. Anybody still paying for last year's Christmas? We are a country of debt. And so Christmas season just adds to that. I heard a conversation last Sunday of trying to remind their kids that Christmas only happens every other year at their house, right? Financial debt. It's not always a time of financial peace as well. Can't always meet the kids' expectations. Can't always feel like you afford the gifts. You might be in an economic pinch. What about peace of mind? I mean, it's one of the most stressful times of the year. Have you been to Target leading up to Christmas? Like, we had to park in Priceville to go to Target yesterday in Decatur, Alabama. I mean, not a lot of stress-free living during the holidays. What about the piece of your schedule? I guess we could take a poll today on who has to attend the most Christmases. Does anyone have to attend more than 5 Christmases? in your family? We have a few. Anyone ever hit double figures? When we were living away, Amanda?
13.
13 Christmases. You have 13 is an unlucky number. Maybe that's your
Probably.
13 Christmases. That may be a record. When we used to live away from our family and we'd come home and the kids were small, you'd have to attend a lot of different Christmases. Finally, kind of my solution that didn't always go over so well is, hey, we're just going to be here. If you want to see the kids, then you just come here and we'll celebrate Christmas. But it can be a time, there's not a lot of peace of heart, peace of mind, peace of the checkbook, not a lot of schedule peace. And I don't know about you, but like it's not a time of physical peace for me. I'm going to pack on pounds on top of the baby pounds I've already packed on. I'm probably going to lose some sleep during this holiday. By the time Christmas Eve hits next week, if I can even remember what day to show up at church, I know that I'm probably going to be largely fueled by caffeine and wassail, right? We're trying to show up and to get here. It can be a time that's not fueled by a lot of peace. It can be the exact opposite of peace. And it makes us think, is Christmas really the most wondrous time of the year? Like we sing and like we talk about. There may be peace on earth, but there's not a lot of peace in our lives. I read a little thing last year that said there are city sidewalks and there's busy sidewalks, but I'm not sure it is children laughing and people passing smile after smile. It's more children fighting and people crashing from all the bills and alcohol they consume during Christmas. Silver bells turn more into ringing cells as we're trying to keep track of everything going on during the holidays. Now, I don't have to preach a message on the over-commercialization of Christmas, do I? I don't have to preach a message and stand up here and rant and rave about how we've turned Christmas into a celebration about us instead of Jesus. We all get that. We all get the over-commercialization of Christmas on so many fronts. We know it, we live it. And I don't even have to put a Keep Christ in Christmas bumper sticker on my car or Jesus is the reason for the season plaque up in my house to be reminded that a lot of times we miss the true meaning of Christmas, or it's been lost, or it's been ignored. We get that. We get that as followers of Jesus. But here's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that we get it partially right. I'm afraid that we get it almost right. That Christmas is about the birth of Jesus. By the way, big shout out to Larry and John for building our manger here. On a whim, by the way, on the last minute notice. So Larry Cheatham and John Bogart, good job on the manger. So I don't have to warn about the over-commercialization. I just think that sometimes we get it partially right, that Christmas is about the birth of Jesus. As a matter of fact, our kids will throw a birthday party for Jesus today. And it is about sharing love, and it is about spending quality time with family and friends, and it is about gift giving. But I feel like that we still miss the key component. I like to call it the manger danger, the danger of the manger. And here's the danger of the manger. The danger of the manger is that we sanitize Christmas, and we sterilize it, and we make it a cute and cuddly story about a baby born into simplicity, the simplicity of a barn, and being laid in a feeding trough, and Christmas becomes a nativity scene. It becomes a nativity scene on our mantle. It becomes a nativity scene that you go to church and you see a Christmas play, or the old school term, a Christmas cantata. And if you go to a really fancy church, they'll have a bunch of singing heads in the form of a Christmas tree. Anyone ever been to one of those? The living Christmas tree? Or if you go to a church that's all in, they'll have a live nativity scene. I have been a member of the cast of a live nativity scene. My very first full-time church while I was still in seminary, old school Baptist church, lived in a parsonage like attached to the church, old school Baptist church. If they didn't get something, they could walk right next door and knock on the pastor's door And if he didn't answer, they would walk in. I kid you not. Man, that makes for some joyful moments. Seeing your pastor in his underwear because he didn't get to the door in time, and you just decide to walk in. You can tell I have some bitterness I need to resolve over this matter. That church had a live nativity scene that my first year or two there we agreed to continue to do. And then I realized one week that the donkey that we were going to use lived literally in a field across from the church. And so we had to get this donkey from that field to the live nativity scene. Only one problem. The donkey was afraid to cross bridges. This is not a joke. Afraid to cross bridges. Guess what was between the field and the live nativity scene? A bridge. The only way that we could get that donkey across the bridge from the field to the live nativity scene is me and two other men picked up a donkey, a live donkey, a full-grown, stubborn, bucking, sharp, whatever those things are called, they have hooves, donkey, picked it up and carried it across the bridge to the live nativity scene. You know what that donkey was saying the entire time? Nay! Nay! That's a really bad joke. The live nativity scene. This whole live nativity scene was topped off with this event. A llama jumped the fence of our live nativity scene, and the last time I saw that llama, he was headed down the highway going to wherever llamas are from. Where are llamas from? Egypt? I don't know.
Peru.
Where? Peru. Why did I know that off the top of my head? All these llamas that have made Facebook profile pictures this week. If you're a Facebook person and you put a llama on your profile, then you don't know that you open your eyes before you open anything else if someone knocks on your door at 3 a.m. But the llama escaped and ran up the highway. And so we've turned Christmas into Christmas pageants, and we've sanitized it and cleaned it up and turned it into live nativity scenes. And all those things are fun and do point to Jesus. But I think the danger of the manger is that the Christmas story in the Bible is far different. That God the Son arrived for a greater purpose than decorating your mantle. There's nothing wrong with decorating your mantle. We decorate our mantle, the Christmas story. But if we leave the Christmas story on the mantle of life, we've missed the true meaning of what Christmas is all about. And it's more than just reading the Christmas story to your kids on Sunday morning before you tear into the gifts. It's more than just reminding them with the elf on the shelf that this is also about Jesus. That the Christmas story is that Jesus came to save sinners. The Christmas story is a culmination of the story of redemption found in the Bible, that God pursues rebels and did what was necessary to redeem them from their sins. So the Christmas story really begins, as we saw in the Curious series, way back in Genesis chapter 3. When God said to Adam and Eve, "You've blown it, you've sinned against me. You're going to be cursed. The earth that you're going to live in is going to be cursed, but don't worry, one day there's coming a snake stomper who will crush the head of the serpent and redeem all of humanity." And from that point forward, the Christmas story began to unfold. And through all of the Old Testament, we have what I call these signposts that are pointing forward to what comes ahead. You ever been driving on a long road trip and the kids are hungry, or you need a place to stop, but you're really not that area of the interstate, but you can look at the signs and say, hey, there's a McDonald's coming up in 26 miles. And if you're like me, I can try to do some quick math in that moment. Well, if I drive 80, I can get 26 miles in close to X amount of minutes. And so I can say that to the kids. Or if I'm being parental and really don't know the answer, I can say, hey, Zach, if we're going to drive 30 miles and drive 80 miles per hour, how many minutes does that break down to? That's a fun game to play, to make your kids feel like they don't know anything about math. Signpost of pointing ahead to something that's coming ahead. And in the Old Testament, time and time again, God steps out of heaven and onto earth in so many different ways to reveal that He's coming. Sometimes it looked like a burning bush. Sometimes it was a ladder in the story of Jacob connecting heaven and earth. Sometimes for the children of Israel it was a pillar of fire and a cloud. Sometimes it was, we learned in the Kara series, a tent in the desert. Sometimes it was a covenant. Sometimes it was a prophet, priest, or king. Sometimes it was a miraculous act of deliverance. But all of these were signposts pointing ahead to Jesus. A Messiah is coming who will redeem the world. And then John tells us that the Word, the eternal God, became flesh so that we might become sons and daughters of light, that He entered the darkness so that we might find grace and forgiveness and hope and meaning. And His arrival is not based on our morality. It's not based on our religion of choice. It's not based on our self-righteousness. It is based on His grace and our need for a Savior, and that's what we miss. That the Son of God came to save raw, undeserving, mistake-prone sinners. And as we saw in Karis, the story of the Bible reads like an America's Most Wanted list, right? The story of redemption, the bloodline of Jesus, is made up of broken, sinful people. We read this morning in Matthew chapter 1, and it made a reference back to the book of Isaiah. And I want you to hear how we find Christmas in Isaiah, and then we'll jump forward into Matthew 1 to wrap it all together. In Isaiah, we find Christmas in the middle of a story of sinning and scheming and striving. I like to call it the miracle in the mess. That's what Christmas is. The supernatural miracle of God the Son becoming a human in the midst of our mess. So let me tell you what was going on in the book of Isaiah. The nation of Israel had been divided into two different nations. There was the southern nation, Judah, and the northern tribes that took the name Israel. So, of course, we're big fans of Judah, because Judah was the nations of the south. Can I get a whoop whoop? Judah and Israel had their own kings. These kings were good kings and bad kings, and as we learn in the history of Israel and Judah, so goes the king, so goes the people. If the kings led effectively and were honoring, God-following kings, and the people would follow suit. But if the kings, like so many of them, were disobedient, then the people would be disobedient toward God. And so there was this constant cycle that we've talked about before here at City Church of obedience and disobedience and redemption and reconciliation and evil kings and good kings. In Isaiah, there was a king in control by the name of Ahaz, A-H-A-Z. Ahaz was the king of the south. He was the king of Judah. He was the grandson of a king named Uzziah. Uzziah was one of the few moral kings that led the nation of Israel in that time. He was a good king that was faithful for 40 plus years. He was a very formidable statesman. He was a God-honoring king. He was righteous in what he did. And he was basically left alone by all of the enemies of the Israelites during that time. Well, King Uzziah, who was known as this formidable statesman, this powerful king, he dies. And soon the other nations, the other kings, began to buzz about how now is the opportunity for them to overthrow Jerusalem, the capital city of the nation of Judah. Uzziah's son, a king by the name of Jotham, led effectively during his short reign, and he held off all of these enemy kings for a short window of time. But something happened. Jotham tragically dies at a very young age, and the kingdom is left in the hands of his son Ahaz. Ahaz is a 20-year-old young man. 20 years old. Can you imagine taking the reins of one of the most powerful nations on the earth at 20 years old? Like, most of you can't even remember your 20s because of what was going on during your 20s. Ahaz, 20 years old, takes the reins of the throne. At the same time that Ahaz takes over, one of the most powerful nations of the earth at that time, the Assyrians, began to spread their wings. Now is our opportunity to take control of the known world. The Assyrians were very brutal people, and they came in swift, and they came in very harsh, and they murdered people, and they took control. They wiped out leaders. They did very cruel things to take over nations. And the Assyrians are beginning to assert themselves, threatening to conquer the world. Ahaz, instead of turning to God, is a very wicked king. He worships idols. He sacrifices his own children to false gods. He lives a very immoral life. He leads the people away from God. He's a horrible decision maker. It's a very immoral time on earth. And so because of Ahaz's immorality, because of the political unrest of the day, it's a very volatile time for Judah. And Jerusalem is thriving, but it's in a very, very precarious situation. So here's what's happening kind of behind the scenes. While all of this is going on, there's two other nations, the nation of Syria and the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom of the tribes of Israel. These two nations, they see what's happening with Assyria, so here's what they decide to do. We're going to form an alliance, and we're going to take over Jerusalem because we can't get Ahaz to do anything. So we're just going to take over Jerusalem, and we're going to build a stronghold that the Assyrians can't overcome. It's better for the three of us to come together and try to fight Assyria than any of us to try to do it alone. Jerusalem's a very fortified city. We'll take over Jerusalem. We'll retreat. We'll live in the city, and the Assyrians will not be able to take hold. And so the Syrians and the Israelites set up camp outside of Jerusalem, and they're about to attack Jerusalem to take it over so that they can have a stronghold. But they can't overcome it. So here they are, camped outside the city. The Syrians, the Israelites with this bigger nation, the Assyrians, about to attack. And so all of these pending attacks generate a lot of fear in the people and in the king Ahaz. As a matter of fact, if you read through the book of Isaiah, chapter 7, where we're at, verse 2 says that the people and the king shook like trees in a windstorm. It's kind of a vivid image, right? Like, we know what wind is like here in North Alabama. The winds shook them like trees. They were afraid. They trembled. So get the picture. Ahaz, the immoral, is on the throne. Assyria, the ticking time bomb, is dominating the world. Pending attack is about to happen. Syria and Israel have joined forces and are trying to force Judah to be a part of them. There's this mounting attack, and so there is fear, there is uncertainty, there is distrust, there is betrayal, there is immorality, there's no moral compass, there is pressure, there is anything happening but peace. No peace whatsoever. No peace on earth, no peace in their lives. And you know what this sounds like? This sounds like an ideal time for God to show up. Like, isn't that what He does? Isn't that what we've learned for an entire series that we called Charis, that in these moments of uncertainty and fear and immorality is when God shows up and shows His grace. It's when God arrives on the scene, and that's exactly what He does, but in a very different way than what we expect. God sends the prophet Isaiah with a very unusual message. His message is basically, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. You will not be defeated. But God, the Assyrians are the most powerful nation on earth. The Israelites, the other tribes of Israel, are ready to attack. They've joined forces with the Syrians. It seems like this is a good time to be afraid. But God says, do not be afraid. They will not succeed. As a matter of fact, they will fail. And the descriptive phrase that Isaiah uses is they are nothing, I like this, they are nothing but smoldering twigs compared to God. You ever set something on fire? Anybody got a burn pile out behind their house? That's a southern phrase, isn't it? When I lived in big cities, burn piles were not an option. One of the first things I did when we moved out to Trinity/Caddo, Alabama, right near the Caddo Cafe is we created a burn pile. And I burned stuff just because I could. But when your burn pile gets near the end and you have a few smoldering twigs, what does it take to put them out? A quick boot and rub, right? To put out the smoldering twigs. So while Ahaz is trembling and insecure and afraid of the Assyrians and the Israelites and the Syrians, God says, don't be afraid. The most powerful armies in the world are smoldering twigs to me. Ahaz, I got this. Trust me. I can be trusted. Is this what they deserve? No. Flashback to immorality. It's not what they deserve. It's an act of grace. Listen to the rest of the story. To prove the validity of his covenant, God makes Ahaz an offer. Check it out in chapter 7, verse 10. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Listen to this. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol, as hell, or high as heaven. Do you get this? God says to Ahaz, I'm going to come through for you. And if you don't believe me, ask anything. As high as heaven and as deep as hell itself. Ask for a sign and I'll provide it. God is giving Ahaz basically a blank check to say, you need me to prove myself. Ask something from me. Ask me for anything and I will do it. Again, this is an act of grace by God. This is not God as some genie in a bottle. Did I say that right, kids? They always get on to me because I say Jenny instead of genie. God is not a genie in a bottle, or is he a genie in a bottle? God is not a genie in a bottle. This is a total act of grace. Speaking of genies in a bottle during Christmas, what better time than to tell a good genie in a bottle joke? So there's this older lady that is scrambling through the attic to try to find something for her kids for Christmas because she has run out of money. She's penniless. She's scrambling trying to find something in the attic to give her kids, and she finds an old lamp. She dusts off the lamp. Maybe if I polish this thing up, it will be presentable. And sure enough, it happened to be a bottle with a genie inside. The genie pops out and says, Merry Christmas, I'm going to grant you 3 wishes. This penniless old lady says, 1, I'd like to be young and beautiful. 2, I would like to have a lot of money. Number 3, I would like a handsome young prince. Poof. Old lady looks in a mirror that's there in the attic with her, and she's suddenly a young and beautiful lady. She looks around her and there's piles of cash. She goes downstairs and a young handsome prince walks out of the room beside her and says, I have been given to you. Oh, I missed a part of the joke that's so important. She asked that the cat be turned into a handsome young prince. That's all she had was this cat that lived in the house with her. Don't miss that part of the joke or it will not go over well when you get the punchline. So cat, poof, is turned into a handsome young prince. The young prince walks out of the room beside, walks into the room with the old lady and says, I am your handsome prince. Now I bet you wish that we had not gone through that little operation, don't you? See how important it was to tell you it was a cat? God is not a genie in a bottle, but God says to Ahaz, because of my grace in spite of your immorality, to show my faithfulness to you. Ask anything. Ask anything. Because that's the kind of God I am. The God that cannot be trusted. This sounds like a reasonable offer. You've done nothing to deserve this. You've done the opposite. But I'm going to bail you out. Because that's what grace does. That's what grace is. God enters the brokenness and offers life. But here's where the story takes an amazing, unusual twist. Chapter 7, verse 12. But Ahaz said, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. I'm putting a cough drop in my mouth right now. My throat's hurting. Did you get that? Ask anything. I will not ask. Now he cloaks it in some pious terms. I will not test the Lord my God. But we read the rest of the story, we know that it's all fake. This is a facade. Ahaz simply says no. The pious verbiage that he uses, I'm not going to test God, is a joke. Basically what he's saying is, God, I'll do it my way. I have a plan. I'm going to join forces with the Assyrians. This is the plan that unfolds in the rest of Isaiah. I'm going to join forces with the enemy. I'm going to join forces with the most wicked nation of my day. Translation. I will continue to worship false gods. I don't trust you, God. I want to join forces with the enemy in hopes that they will make me a powerful king. God, thanks, but no thanks. I'll do it my own way. Now listen, before we add Ahaz to the top 10 biggest idiots list of the Bible, let's not forget that we tend to do the exact same thing in our lives. We're not kings living in fortified cities, being attacked by enemies, but we are, in many ways, our own self-serving kings. And so many times we piece together pathetic moral lives that are marked more by inconsistency than righteousness, and we try and somehow please God with our modified behavior. God, I did this, and God offers grace to us, and we go Frank Sinatra on him. God, I'll do it my way. I'll do it my way. My way. I'm better than that person, and I don't do this. And did you see what I did last week? And did you see how I served? And did you see how I gave? And God, I'll do it my way. We are Ahaz. Or Ahaz. Trying to hold on to our way of living and scheming and ignoring God's offer of grace. So, back to our story. This seems like a good time for God to just withdraw. For God to retreat. For God to say, fine, have it your way. You want it your way, have it your way. And we'll see how that ends for you. But look what God does. He sends Isaiah the prophet, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 13. God speaking through Isaiah. And he said, hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men that you weary my God also? Isaiah is saying to Ahaz, you wear God out. Like it's enough that we have to put up with you. But you're wearing out God. And then here's our key verse that we find in Matthew chapter 1. Therefore, as I tell you a lot, anytime we see the word therefore in the Bible, we know that it's there for a reason. Therefore, in spite of everything you've done, in spite of your immorality, in spite of your choice to snub your nose at God and say you'll do it your way, therefore, in spite of all that, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So centuries before this verse makes it to Matthew chapter 1, Isaiah the prophet stands in the court of a wicked king that has snubbed his face at God and said, I'll do it my way, and says to him, God will provide you a sign in spite of you. God will intervene. It's intervention time. And A&E is not going to be there to record it, but God is going to intervene on behalf of his people. In spite of your rebellion, in spite of your opposition of God, God will intervene. And let's not forget here that God is the subject of all of this and we are the objects of his grace. That God is the initiator. God provides the sign and we are simply recipients. We are objects. He gives, we receive. And here's God's sign. God says a virgin will conceive. Now that's a supernatural act. The virgin, we talk about the virgin birth. It's actually the supernatural element of it. It's the virgin conception. A virgin will conceive. Now, let's be honest, that's one way to get attention, right? If a virgin shows up and says, I'm pregnant, then we normally say, well, you're not a virgin. If you're pregnant, hello, 2 and 2 always equals 4. That's one way to get attention. God says a virgin will conceive. Like, I want to show you that this is a supernatural act. I'm going to defy the laws of nature. A virgin will conceive. I'm not going to write it on the clouds. I'm not going to pass out notes. A virgin will conceive. Now, we like to think in those terms. If God would just put it in the clouds. Do you understand that God himself came to earth? Like, that's bigger than writing it in the clouds. God came to earth. A virgin conceived. And she will bear a son. In other words, the child will be fully human, and his name will be Emmanuel, fully God living in us. Here's how Paul described it in Colossians chapter 2 and verse 9. Paul says, "For in him, in Jesus, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily." Everything that makes God God was possessed by God the Son, Jesus Christ. That in him the fullness of God dwell. She will bear a son. He will be fully human. His name will be Emmanuel. He will be God living among us. Fully God, fully human. Not two different persons. One person. He's not apart from us or distant from us, but he is with us. Two natures, one person. Can't really wrap our minds around that, can we? How he can be fully God and fully human, and theologians have tried to explain it, but our explanations always fall short. To try and understand how a single person, Jesus Christ, could be both fully God and fully human, did never cease to be God, or he's not God, and yet fully human at the same time. It's a supernatural act to validate the promises of God, that God is going to intervene in a way that goes beyond Ahaz, that goes beyond the context of Isaiah 7, that God's intervention will change the course of human history, that will affect every single person, that will affect us in 2016, sitting in Decatur, Alabama, that the story of redemption that unfolded way back in Isaiah chapter 7, when God promised this immoral king trembling like the trees in a windstorm, that God promised this king that had nothing to do with God and didn't want anything to do with God, this sinful, rebellious people that said no to God and turned their back on God, that God's promise to those people would ring true to us today, who, by the way, are equally as wicked and equally as much Ahaz, and turn our backs on God to pursue our own way and to somehow thwart grace by our own plan. Fully God, fully human. Let's connect the dots. Matthew 1:20. But as he, Joseph, considered these things, as he was thinking about putting Mary away, because his reaction was just like ours would be, Joseph, I know we're engaged. I'm pregnant, but don't worry. There's no other man involved. Are you kidding? Like what? I'm pregnant, but I'm a virgin. Well, excuse me, like, can't be pregnant and a virgin. When Joseph was considering what to do, because he was a righteous man, a just man, he wanted to do the right thing, but he's torn because he loves Mary, and yet she's telling him this far-fetched story that an angel, that God has overshadowed her, and she's somehow pregnant, even though she's a virgin, and everything in Joseph screams, this makes no sense. And God sends his angel. While he was considering these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, here's our language again, do not, what? Fear. Don't be afraid. When God's in our corner, we learn to trust, and fear is the opposite of that trust. Do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. Joseph learns that Mary's pregnant, and he wants to do the right thing. He had every right in that culture to publicly shame her, but the text says he wanted to divorce her quietly. He loves, but he feels betrayed, and he has this dream, and the angel says, don't be afraid. It's a common theme. in the Scriptures. It's a common theme when God and humanity come face to face to be afraid. We see it in the story of the shepherds, don't we? Like don't be afraid. God's coming to earth. Don't be afraid. She's telling the truth. That which is in her is of God. Take her as your wife. Take him as your child. And name him Jesus. Verse 21, she will bear a son. You will call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. And all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. We read it. The virgin will conceive. Name him Jesus. The name Jesus means Savior. It means he came to save people from their sins. By the way, Joseph, this is happening because God intervenes. God has arrived 700 plus years ago. God promised a wicked king. God promised a nation that was undeserving of his grace. God promised a people that he would enter our worlds as a human and solve the sin problem. And the final sign has been given. Jesus is coming. Now is the time of fulfillment. All of that and everything that has happened up to that point, it was all pointing to Jesus. Emmanuel. God is with us. Jesus is the final sign. He is the fulfilled promise of God. Jesus is the better story. He's the better story. God redeemed sinful people, and we see the story throughout all of the Old Covenant of time and time and time again of God showing up to Abraham and Moses and Judah and Hosea and the prophets and the children of Israel and Adam and Eve and time and time and time and time again. God shows up. But in this moment in history, Jesus is the better story. Jesus is the fulfillment. He's the final sign. It's all pointing to Jesus. It's all pointing to Jesus. And here's the gospel. The good news in the midst of all this is that Jesus came to save people from their sins. Jesus came to save the Ahazes of the world. And guess what? I'm an Ahaz. And you're an Ahaz. Jesus came to save sinners. Anybody qualify? Jesus came to save sinful people who need a Savior. And into our fearful, scheming, sinful, broken, messed up worlds, God the Son arrived. And He lived among us. And He did what Ahaz could not do. And He did what you and I cannot do. He remained sinless, and He became the final and complete sacrifice for our sins. And in doing so, He broke into our darkness. He broke into our fallenness. He broke into our depravity to provide life to rebellious people. You see, this story, this Jesus story, this Christmas story, this story about Jesus, the one who came to save sinners. This Jesus story at Christmas time goes beyond sanitized manger sets. And it goes beyond mantle decorations, and it goes beyond live nativity scenes, and it goes beyond awkward men and women wearing bathrobes standing in a church courtyard as cars drive past, and it goes by mediocre Christmas pageants at best, and it goes beyond reading the Christmas story on Christmas morning. Let's not make the mistake of turning Jesus into a sanctified Santa Claus. Don't miss the depth of the story and the hype of the celebration. He's more than a sanctified Santa Claus. He's more than someone who showed up to give good gifts and to read the Bible storybook about. He's the Son of God that entered into our broken worlds, and in the midst of the danger of the manger, don't forget We are Ahaz. And the gospel says, Jesus came to save Ahaz. God sent a sign, the ultimate sign, the final sign, the better sign. God sent a sign, and his name is Jesus. And he arrived for one purpose: to save people, to save sinners from their sins. And that's good news, because I'm a sinner, just like you. Let's bow our heads for prayer.